on Facebook. So I'll see you in a few minutes. All right, here we go. Well, good afternoon. My name is Steve Givens. I am the host of Bridges Conversations, also the executive director of the Bridges Foundation here in St. Louis, Missouri. We are an organization about 35 years old who offer the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola in everyday life. So today we are speaking with Eric Clayton. He's the deputy director of communications at the Jesuit Conference of Canada in the United States, where some of you may know he writes a weekly column called Now Discern This, which I know many of us here in St. Louis look forward to receiving every week. He's also one of the hosts of the AMDG podcast, and in his role at the conference produces a range of multimedia content on Ignatian spirituality and storytelling. He's also the award-winning author of a number of books, including a couple that we're going to be talking about today: My Life with the Jedi, The Spirituality of Star Wars, and Cannonball Moments, Telling Your Story, Deepening Your Faith. He also has an upcoming book called Finding Peace Here and Now, How Ignatian Spirituality Leads to Healing and Wholeness, which is due out in May. Good afternoon, Eric.
Steve, good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. I'm going to ask you to start, as we kind of always start with our guests, by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your personal, your family upbringing, where you were raised, how you were raised. And I know a little bit of this from reading your books, but a little bit of how you came to be involved with the Jesuits and with Ignatian spirituality. So kind of give us that little first part of your life, if you could.
Sure, yeah. So I'm originally from California, actually, but I grew up outside of Philadelphia. Went to one of the local parishes there. We were very involved with youth ministry. My mom worked with the parish, so kind of got to behind the scenes look at kind of Catholic parishes and just what it meant to be in the parish and part of parish life. So it was really important to me growing up. Went to Archdiocesan elementary school, high school. And then I went to Fairfield University, which is one of the Jesuit schools in Connecticut. It is the Jesuit school in Connecticut. I didn't know anything about the Jesuits or Ignatian spirituality when I went there. I didn't even necessarily go thinking, oh, I want to continue with Catholic education. It just so happened to be the school was great. I loved the campus. They had what I wanted to study. It was just kind of perfect for me. But kind of ended up stepping into Fairfield University with a really solid grounding in kind of faith and Catholicism, and then gravitated towards campus ministry and all of those usual things, service immersion trips, retreats, kind of the different service projects in and around the community, and a cohort of really great people that that was important to as well. So that community was really key. It was there as I was getting involved with all that, kind of good stuff, as I feel like a lot of, Jesuit educated folks do, you begin to become introduced to the spiritual exercises. And I was encouraged to do, I think it was like a 10-week version, during the semester. And it was a real kind of a light touch. It was a real soft introduction. But it was just the kind of the snowball that got me. It changed how I, prayed, how I viewed God, and ultimately got me in touch with a spiritual director who I was, who was my director more or less for 15 years until he passed away last year. And then part of that too, some of those service immersion trips, when you're sent, to a whole new context and you're taken out of your own kind of status quo, you have to expand how you understand the world and how you understand God working in the world. And so for me, that ended up being in the Philippines. We did a week prior to World Youth Day when it was in Australia, and just being in a different context and being, I was very young. I was only 18 then, but it just totally changed. God got so much bigger for me. And so being, college is a time for all that kind of discovery, right? So that combination of this profound experience of a much bigger God than I ever imagined, having someone really begin to walk me through the exercises and then to stick with me, week after week, through spiritual direction. And then my own kind of studies, interests in, I was studying creative writing, I was studying international studies. And so that sense of, what are the stories we tell, against the backdrop of the world, it was really important to me as I grew. And then I did a year of service, a little less than a year in Bolivia after graduation. And I wound up in Baltimore. I worked for Catholic Relief Services for a number of years, and they're based here in Baltimore. There's a Jesuit parish here. And so we began to, my wife and I go, we were married there, and we attended, mass at this Jesuit parish. And so, it was kind of that through line of some of the same spirituality from Fairfield, but then some of the spirituality, coming to life again in our parish life. And certainly Ignatian spirituality works really well at a place like Catholic Relief Services, where, finding God in all things is what they strive to do, and to, serve God in all people. And so that was my introduction. But then when I got this opportunity to work with the Jesuits at the Jesuit Conference of Canada in the U.S., it just got so much deeper. I got the chance to really see and pray about and write about the spirituality that just touches so many things. And that's why I made the exercises in everyday life. So it was a full year with the same spiritual director who'd been with me since Fairfield. So that's the quick kind of sprint through my story.
Nice. And you got a family now, is that right?
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's probably a key part too. Yes, I have two daughters, 7 and 4.5, and a wife, and yeah, we live outside of Baltimore now.
Nice. Well, I think many people who might be listening to this are familiar, or at least have heard of your book, Cannonball Moments, telling your story, deepening your faith. It came out in that Ignatian year, that the 500th anniversary of that actual Cannonball moment. I know I work with the Ignatian Volunteer Corps also here in St. Louis as a spiritual reflector, and a number of the corps members or all of the corps members were reading your book that year, so
Yeah.
I started hearing more and more about this book. Tell us a little bit, I think part of that about the power of storytelling, and about, as the subtitle says, telling your own story. So can you talk a little bit about how and when these two ideas of Ignatius's story and telling your own story, how did that begin to come together for you? And just tell a little bit about what you were trying to do with that book, I guess.
Yeah, when I was an undergraduate at Fairfield University, sophomore year, second year, I was part of the Ignatian Residential College, which was this living and learning experience, where you're really supposed to kind of ground that spirituality of Ignatius in everything you do that year, academics, extracurriculars, and really in the place where you lived. And there were three questions that guided that year, and I use them in my book. Who am I? Whose am I? Who am I called to be? Right? Vocation questions. Questions we all, they're not novel. We wrestle with them every day. But having the year shaped with those questions, and being really primed to say, where is God inviting me? How do these kind of pull out some of the nuggets of my own life? Those are story questions, and so it was a very formative moment. And then when I came back to Ignatian spirituality in a deeper way in this role, and began to think about, I love stories, right? I studied creative writing, and I love storytelling, and I love writing stories. That's important to me. But the more I thought about Ignatian spirituality, it's a spirituality that demands we look at our stories, and demands that we look at our stories with God, right? We walk with God through our unfolding story. And it's a spiritual tradition that claims that God is intimately concerned with our story, the nitty-gritty details, because God is in all things, right? And God desires to deal directly with us, and present to what we are doing. And so I think it was the combination of all these things, this love of stories, this desire to share and tell stories, and be enchanted by stories. It began in those early days at Fairfield, and then just as I grew as a professional, and felt this love of storytelling, realizing that was God at work, in the spiritual life.
Yeah. You, in that book, you specifically point to kind of three Ignatian practices that, as you say, help us dig into who we are and what makes us tick. Anyone familiar with the spiritual exercises will know what these are, but they are, as you point out, using our imaginations. A kind of prayer that we're encouraged to do in the spiritual exercises, employing the examen, that way of taking a little closer look at our life, and then reflecting on our own cannonball moments. So can you talk a little bit more about each of these, and how they play into spirituality, and how spirituality plays into that storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Imagination, right? So imagination is key to the Ignatian tradition. Ignatius says that God meets us in the imagination, and Ignatius's story shows that. After his quote unquote cannonball moment, right? He's spending time recovering in his bed in Loyola, but God is speaking to him through his own love of stories, right? His own imagination. And what I'm really struck by, what I've been praying with recently, is yes, the story goes, right? Ignatius wants to see stories, read stories of kind of chivalry and knights, and all this daring exploits. He's instead given stories of the saints and Jesus. He finds that as he's praying with those, he finds consolation, and when he returns to stories of his old life, being a knight, he finds in inner desolation. I think that's really helpful when we think about the imagination. But I think what I am struck by is that it's in that place of the imagination that God allows Ignatius to imagine something totally beyond what he'd ever thought of before. Totally flips his status quo upside down. It's not just that he's daydreaming. He's thinking, he's being given this vision of something totally different than he'd ever dreamed possible, and then invited into it. Right? That's the imagination. God works in that place in our minds. And I think that we all have access to God in that way. Also, in the Ignatian tradition, right, the imagination is our way into Scripture, into the stories of Jesus and all the characters of Scripture. We're called to put ourselves there, employing our imagination, our senses, to more deeply enter into the stories. So the imagination is key. The examen. The examen is that daily or twice a day, or however often you want, prayer where we go through the nitty-gritty details of the ordinariness of our day with God, and also those big moments, right? But again, it's a reminder. It's a practice of saying, oh, hey, God does care about that time I tied my shoe, or tripped over the way on the way out the door, or ignored my kid, or pushed the cat out of the way, or what, good, bad, and different. These little things, God is here in these little moments, and so we have to spend time going back through and allowing God to speak to us through those things. Both the things that we did well, and also the things where we could perhaps come a little closer to God's vision for the world. And then the Cannonball moment. I think there's a lot to do about the Cannonball moment, and I think that it's important because it's a hinge moment, right? We all have these hinge moments in our lives. These moments where the door kind of swings in two different directions, and we decide which way we're going to go. We don't want to trivialize the Cannonball moment. It was a war wound, right? At the same time, these moments of destruction and sadness and suffering and sorrow can be the kind of the fertile ground upon which then something new can grow. But what's important, I think, is that we take that time, as Ignatius had to, right, to recover, to reflect, and then to make a decision. Right, the Cannonball moment isn't what made Ignatius the saint. The Cannonball moment is what propelled him to say, "Is my life what God wants it to be now? Am I making the right decisions, or do I need to recalibrate what I'm up to, and perhaps allow God to birth something new through my life?"
Yeah, yeah, and that I was thinking when we were talking about the examen. The examen helps us, right, remember those little details of our life that when we don't stop to pay attention to them, they just go right over our head, right? And we don't see them at all. And so God is in those details, just as details are in all good storytelling, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. These are all elements of story, right? What's the catalyst for the hero to go out and begin the adventure, right? Cannonball moment. The examine, what are those specific details? I always I took creative writing classes, the professor would say, drop us in the scene, let us look around. And so you want to bring richness to those scenes. You don't want to say, I think the example I always give, and perhaps it's a silly one, but you wouldn't write, "Oh, our hero passed some trash on the side of the road," right? That's not super specific. You kind of get a vague sense, but you could instead say, "Our hero passed a half-empty bottle of Pepsi in which a small family of ants had taken up residence." Oh, that's very visual, right? Now you can see it. And I think that's what the examine can do, crystallize some of those details. And then the imagination, again, that's kind of the fuel for our stories, and the sustenance.
Yeah. Yeah. We do have a few people listening out there. Thank you for being there. If you have a question for Eric, feel free to drop them in the comment section on Facebook, and we'll get to them as we can. Speaking of storytelling and that the journey of stories and our heroes, let's move on to your next book, your most recent book, which is called My Life with the Jedi, the Spirituality of Star Wars. It takes us into kind of, as you've already led, another kind of storytelling, generally into the idea of myth, more specifically into the Star Wars saga and the hero's journey. Um, when you sent me this book, you said, in case you're interested in Star Wars, maybe we can talk about this too. And what I didn't tell you is I know very little about Star Wars. I mean, I've seen the first couple, and and maybe it's just the time of my life or whatever. I don't not like them, not like them, just not really into them. But I think, as I said to you earlier when we were talking, I think the wonderful thing about this book is I was able to read it and maybe not tune into every detail about Star Wars that you're giving for those who know it, but I still found myself kind of engaged in this Ignatian journey. What does it mean to go on our own journey, and how is does Ignatian spirituality help us do that? So, but there are a lot of Star Wars fans out there, obviously. So just talk a little bit, if you could, about how this idea for this book came about, and maybe even a little bit more of that. And I know this from the book, but a little bit about how your interest in Star Wars blossomed and then changed into something like this.
Yeah,
That's a
well,
lot of that's a lot of questions, I realize.
I know I'll just talk and you just keep me on the rails here. But yeah, for folks who are watching, you can see my love of Star Wars behind me and the variety of art and Legos that are there. Yeah, I mean, so I'm a big Star Wars fan. My dad, the story I tell because it's the true story. Is my dad when I was, I don't know, probably like second grade ish. Um, he said, "I think you're gonna like these movies." So he pulled out his VHS collection of the original trilogy, and we popped him in the VCR, and over the course of a week or two or whatever, we watched all three, and I was like, "Yeah, these are awesome." And so it was that kind of early connection with my dad. But then it was like right before the special editions came out. So whatever year that time frame was. So now we went and we saw Star Wars in the theaters again. And so now I'm like, oh man, this is really cool. It's like the right age. Me and my friends would pretend we're using the Force and swinging paper towel rolls around or whatever. And then shortly thereafter, the Phantom Menace comes out, right? So it's just like it was like you dropped me kind of in the Star Wars track right at the right moment for just more and more Star Wars to be coming out. Um, so I loved it, right? I was the right audience. I really enjoyed it. I don't know how much of the spirituality of it I kind of picked up on then. I think I probably, the idea of the Force is really compelling. This idea that it's both, again, a source of sustenance for your kind of religiosity, your monks, your monastic life, but also this source of power to be used for good. And Obi-Wan Kenobi is such like a mysterious figure in the original movies. Um, and that's really compelling. So, I mean, I could kind of wax poetic for a long time, but I'll skip ahead here. And the opportunity to write. So this book is it kind of after Cannonball Moments had come out. My friend and editor at Loyola Press were kind of just going back and forth. He had taken the unenviable position that the Obi-Wan Kenobi show was not good, and so we were having a little bit back and forth on email, just kind of playing around. And as an afterthought, I said, hey, if you ever want somebody to kind of think about a book on Ignatian spirituality and Star Wars, like I'm your guy. And he did want that, and like a week later, we had a proposal together, and we were rocking and rolling. So it's just like a cool story of like two Star Wars fans like working to get this thing into the world. And
There it is, by the way.
there it
in
is.
case
Yeah, if you're
anybody
watching
hasn't seen it. There you go.
you're watching at home. Um, and so I mean, it was a project, that was. I am interested in, again, God in all things, but how kind of the stories of our time can expose God to us, right? Can mediate God for us, because if God is at work in all things, as we believe in the Ignatian tradition, then God is at work in the stories that we're telling, and these stories, I think, that resonate with us, right? This impulse that we so often have to say, "Hey, have you seen this? You have to see this. You have to read this." That impulse is us saying, "This is a story that matters to me. It struck a chord in me, and I think it's going to strike a chord in you." And we're gonna kind of cross that bridge of story together. That I think that's kind of was the driving force for me to say this is how I feel about Star Wars. But I think there's something more here that I want to invite people into. I'm not super interested in like the parallels, like who's Jesus supposed to be in Star Wars, or like did you know secretly it's all about Jesus. I don't maybe, but that's not my personal interest in this kind of pop culture storytelling. I'm more interested in how can we use these stories to pray. How can we get actually closer to God through these stories, not to like a parallel sense of things, but God is actually speaking to us directly through these stories. What if God invited us into the dark side cave? What if God invited us to to live as a desert recluse in the sands of Tatooine? How would we respond? What would that do for our spiritual lives? So some of these questions that these stories expose, I think, in our spiritual lives are what I'm interested in reflecting on. So that's what I did with the book. And you're right, there are some really deep cut Easter eggs there throughout the book for like super hardcore Star Wars fans, but hopefully folks that are just kind of passing interest in Star Wars will also enjoy it too, and find something about themselves. It's written for a wide audience. I've had a chance to talk with kind of folks of no faith, or folks that are perhaps not super interested in religion at all. But we talk about this book because we both love Star Wars, and it's a bridge, that we can go. I'm pretty honest. Obviously I'm a Catholic guy who's steeped in Ignatian spirituality. That's the perspective I bring. But I think these stories give us a way to talk to people about things that matter. And I believe, right, in that conversation, of course, that's God, right? God is there delighting.
Yeah.
Did I answer those questions?
Yeah, you're answering well. I was thinking, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but obviously the people who created well, I shouldn't say obviously, but I don't believe the people that created Star Wars are steeped in Ignatian spirituality either, right? So, but what do you imagine or maybe know they would say about this kind of the spirituality of the hero's journey and uh without calling the Star Wars saga specifically religious or Christian or anything like that, what would you say the creators of Star Wars, their what would they say their connection is to on a more spiritual realm of things, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, no, so George Lucas, quite famously was influenced by Joseph Campbell, his hero's journey and myth, right?
Right.
And Campbell does a lot of research on, kind of looking at myth across time and culture, and really compelling stuff. And so Lucas, and this is documented. This isn't my opinion. Was interested in telling a story in which people of all faiths and none could find themselves, right? That's why the Force is very vague. It's not a there's not a lot of, at least in the original telling, right? There's not a lot of rules to things. It's You're really supposed to be able to find yourself in it. And that's again why I found this project so compelling, because I can find myself in it via the Ignatian spirituality kind of doorway. But others, there's books on Star Wars and Hinduism, and Star Wars and Buddhism, and Star Wars and all sorts of different, Stoicism, all sorts of different things, different philosophical and religious traditions, and those are all valid and wonderful ways in. And so we all enter in through our own door, but we meet in the middle talking about Star Wars, and perhaps we learn something about one another, and share something of ourselves. And I do think that was something Lucas hoped for in at least in that initial conception of the Force. There's a lot of different religious stuff going on in Star Wars. He's clearly pulling from a whole pantheon of tradition to create something that's new, but also kind of feels familiar. And something that we can kind of all kind of say that seems like something that I do, right? And that's our way in.
Yeah, in your book, you quote, I don't know this author, but Chris Taylor. He says, the Force is so basic a concept as to be universally appealing, a religion for the secular age that is so well suited to our times, precisely because it is bereft of details.
Yeah.
Um, say a few more words about that, maybe, and then we'll move on. But, yeah.
Yeah, no, so Chris Taylor was a journalist, and that's from a wonderful book. If anyone's really interested in nerding out, how Star Wars conquered the universe, I think is what it's called, and it's a compendium. It's a kind of historical look at Star Wars as a pop culture phenomenon. And so he's talking about this, like exactly this, and that's the quote I was kind of like thinking of in my mind as I was answering your previous question. Is this idea that Lucas is trying to create something that is I don't want to say welcome. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but to me, it's welcoming. It's an invitation and a challenge to dialogue, right? It's a thing that says, hey, this story is for everybody, and we all can kind of enter into it, and we all can find ourselves in it, but also find other people that are so different than us also in this story. And isn't that a cool thing? And we talk so much. I'm interested again in it's kind of pop culture. I've given some retreats on pop culture and spirituality because I like to tease this out. Right, it's not just Star Wars. People have all sorts of different stories they love, but you know, it's no secret, right? That in some ways, religion and churches are not as full as they once were, and one of the many kind of casualties of that is that we don't have these shared stories, these shared myths, and in some ways, these stories of pop culture become those shared stories upon which we can interact and talk with one another, and ferret out some of our values and better understand ourselves by finding these stories that we can share and talk about and explore. And I think that's why Lucas was interested in Campbell's work, and I think that's why I'm interested in Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to be mindful of our time here a little bit. I want to at least touch, at least briefly, for a few minutes on your upcoming book, and maybe this summer we can have you back to talk about this in a little more detail or something. But you have a book coming out sometime this later spring in May or so, called "Finding Peace Here and Now: How Ignatian Spirituality Leads to Healing and Wholeness." Can you just give us a kind of a sneak peek on what this is about and how it came about, this whole topic of healing and wholeness?
Yeah, sure. So it comes out on May 6th from Brazos Press. And the idea of peace has always been one I've been interested in. So when I did international studies at Fairfield, and I studied international media at American University for my master's, peace was the theme, kind of like that was like the focus of my studies. And so that's the other kind of side of my brain in some ways. And in both books, Cannonball Moments and In My Life with the Jedi, I have a section on peace. That's kind of how Star Wars ends. The book on Star Wars ends is this meditation on violence is inherent to the story, and are we okay with that? And so in some ways, this new book kind of takes that and goes with it. It almost in some ways feels like a sequel to Cannonball Moments, in that I am again unpacking the exercises. It looks at it looks at peace through the lens of the exercises. It tacks on to the 4 weeks, and I think often we feel that Ignatian spirituality is too heavy with a violent imagery, right? Overly masculine, overly violent imagery, and people think, oh, there's it's hard to find a peace imagery in this, and so the book takes that as a challenge a little bit and says, I actually think we can. I think Ignatius knows a lot about peace. I also think the spiritual tradition, right, of here and now. God has made me to be enough. And I think so often I think a lot of the conflict in our world, interpersonally, kind of within ourselves and beyond, comes from the sense is that I am not enough. I don't have enough. I need more. I'm jealous of what you have and what you are. But if we can actually realize that God delights in us now, we are beloved of God exactly as we are, and that we are the deeper we descend into ourselves, to kind of borrow it from Teilhard de Chardin, the more we find God at work. I think that can bring us a lot of peace. So that's the leaping off point for the book, and again, it's meant to be this extended meditation and grappling with what does it mean to do peace, to live peace, to be peace, when there's just so much unpeace around us.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up in a few minutes. If anyone who's watching has a question for Eric, we've got a few minutes to do that. Let me go over a couple pieces of business. First of all, just a reminder that Bridges Conversations is a production of the Bridges Foundation here in St. Louis. We offer a 9-month experience of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius in everyday life through about 5 different groups. We do it in a small group community setting, including one that's a virtual community online, and then 4 or 5 different locations here in St. Louis. So if you want more information about that, please visit our website, bridgesfoundation.org. We begin the retreat every September. So also I wanted to just make note that the next episode of Bridges Conversations will be on March 7th, and we'll be talking with author Christine Eberly about her new book, Finding God Along the Way, Wisdom from the Ignatian Camino for Life at Home. It's a book I have been reading a couple chapters of every day and enjoying reading Christine's journey and what it means for the rest of us. So we'll be talking with her in March.
That's a great book.
Yeah, it's very, very, I find I can easily, Christine and I have a lot in common in regard to the things we're involved in and the work that we used to do and that sort of thing. So it's, she's deadly honest about the difficulty that this journey was for her and her worries going into it, that sort of thing. So it's a great read. Oh, look at this. There's Christine Eberly saying thanks. She's listening in right now. So
I didn't even know she was there. Good thing I said something nice, huh?
There you go. Oh yeah, that Christine Eberly.
No, it's a wonderful book.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll be talking with her next time. So I think that's about it then for now. Let me go back to my banners here. Yeah. So join us on March 7th with Christine. Anything in closing you'd like to offer us, Eric?
Oh man, no, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I just encourage people. I think storytelling and spirituality are just key. The more you reflect on your own story, the more you find God there at work, kind of unfolding and delighting. So I think those are.
If you're anyone listening now or later, to our podcast. If you're a member of the Bridges community already, or if you have just completed the spiritual exercises anywhere, next we have an ongoing formation program called the Majas program. That is a monthly program, also runs 9 months beginning in September. I'm going to be leading a writing group next year, and we're going to be using Cannonball Moments as our text. So if you're interested in writing and storytelling, please consider joining us next year for that. So,
Yeah.
All right,
I should
Eric.
say, if you want to find my stuff, ericclaytonwrites.com is my website. I always forget to advertise.
Thank you. EricClaytonWrites.com. Nice.
That's the one.
And how can people sign up to get Now Hear This?
Now to start this, if you go to jesuits.org/NDT, the first 3 letters, NDT, jesuits.org/NDT, you'll get those in your inbox every Wednesday.
Yeah, they're great and consistently good, so it's really good storytelling. So all right, well, we're going to end it there. Thank you all for tuning in. Eric, thank you very much, and we'll see you all next month. Eric, if you want to just hold on a minute, I'll be with you in just a minute. We'll see you all next time.